Hi everyone, myself Satya, Department of Mathematics, SNS College of Technology, Coimbatore. So in today's class, we are going to start the topic which is graph. Okay, so a graph which consists of an non-empty set V. Okay, that V is called the set of vertices and E is called the set of edges, and pi is a mapping from the set of edges to unordered pairs of V. Okay, the vertices are represented by the points. Each edge is represented by a line diagrammatically. So you can see the diagram. Okay, so from this diagram, what are the edges? Yes, E1, E2, etc. E5, oh sorry, E6, and the vertices are V1, V2, V3, V4. Now we are going to have the terminologies one by one. Okay, the first thing is we are going to see self loop. If there is an edge from Vi to Vi, then that edge is called self loop or simply loop. In the figure E5, yes, so which is from E5 to E5, that is V2 to V2. Starting and ending should be same. That edge is called self loop. Okay, and next is parallel edges. When we say the two edges are parallel, if they have a same endpoints, then the edges are called parallel edges. So in the figure we can say E3 and E6 will have same endpoints. That means those two edges are parallel edges. Incident: if the vertex Vi is an end vertex of some edge Ek, then Ek is said to be incident with Vi. So E4, which is incident with V1 and V3. Adjacent vertices and edges. Two edges are said to be adjacent if they are incident on a common vertex. When we say the two edges are adjacent, they will have a common vertex. And when we say the vertices are adjacent, they have a common, they should have the edge between those two vertices. Then only we can call it as adjacent vertices. And simple graph, a graph which has neither self loop nor parallel edges. So that is called simple graph. And what is mean by isolated? So a vertex having no edge which is incident on it is called an isolated vertex. Next, for an isolated vertex, the degree is 0. And what is mean by pennant vertex? If the degree of any vertex which is 1, then that vertex is said to be a pennant vertex. And directed edges. So in a graph G, an edge which is associated with an ordered pair of V cross V is called a directed edge of G. And digraph, a graph in which every edge is directed edge, which is called digraph or directed graph. Undirected graph, a graph in which every edge is undirected is called an undirected graph. Okay, if the direction is mentioned, we can say which is directed graph. If it is not mentioned, which is undirected graph. If some edges are directed, some edges are undirected in a graph, the graph is called mixed graph. A graph which contains some parallel edges is called a multigraph. Pseudograph, a graph in which loops and parallel edges are allowed, is a pseudograph. So these are the basic definitions. Okay. So what are the things we saw today? Yes, just we can recall all the definitions, right? So first thing is what? We can have the graph. Okay. Wait. Now you can see the graph. Okay, now tell me what is self loop. Self loop is nothing but starting and ending vertex, it should be same. So that is called self loop. So here E5 is the self loop. And what is mean by a parallel edge? Yes, so the two edges have common endpoints. So those two edges are called parallel edges. So here E3 and E6 are parallel edges. Okay. The next thing is what? When we say which is when we say the two vertices are adjacent, there should be edge between those two vertices. And you can see here V1 and V3 are adjacent. Yes, it's adjacent because we'll have a line between those two vertices. Okay, next thing is when we say two edges are adjacent, it should have the common vertex. So E1 and E4 are adjacent. Yes, it should have the common vertex V1. And is it a simple graph? No, because this graph which contains self loop and parallel edges, so it is not a simple graph. And what is mean by pennant? Isolated? Yes, we don't have any edge, so the degree of that vertex is 0. If the degree is 1, then we can say which is pennant vertex. And the next thing is what? Yes, when we say this graph is directed or undirected, if the direction is mentioned, we can say it is directed graph. If the direction which is not mentioned, which is undirected graph. If you see here, this graph is Directed or undirected? It is undirected graph because the direction which is not mentioned. Okay, we covered all the points. Incident, that is we know, right? So we covered all the points. Simple graph, isolated, pendant, directed edge, digraph, undirected graph, and a few more things which is mixed. Some edges are directed, some are undirected. So that type of graph is called mixed graph, but here we don't have any graph example, right? And multiple will have some parallel edge. That is called multi-graph. Pseudo will have loop and parallel edge. That is the beginning of the unit we saw one graph, right? In that graph we will have loop and parallel edge. So that is called pseudo graph. Okay. So the remaining thing we will see in the next class. Thank you.